There is a chair at our kitchen table that no one is allowed to sit in but my husband. And the first winter I was married, at 21 years old, I learned that the most important things in a marriage are the ones that are never said out loud. I want to tell you about the night I stopped telling my husband what I was thinking, and why, in the end, nearly every Amish wife I have ever known comes to the same quiet place. I did not have a word for it yet, when it began. I was a new bride. 3 years I have been married now, into a strict old order district, but that first winter I was still soft, still full of all the things I had imagined marriage would be. My mother had told me that a good wife keeps a warm house and a still tongue, and I thought I understood her. I did not. Amos, my husband, is not a cruel man. I want you to hear me say that before I say anything else, because the story I am about to tell you is not a story about a bad man. It is a story about a good man and a good woman, and the wall of silence that our whole way of life builds between them, one plain day at a time. That first winter, I still talked to him the way I talked to my sisters. When the lamp was low and the day was done, I would tell him things, little things, what I had thought about while I hung the wash in the cold, a dream I had had, a worry that had followed me around the house all day like a barn cat. I thought that was what the evenings were for. I thought marriage was two people, finally allowed to say the small, true things to each other in the dark. One night in that first January, I told him I was lonely. I remember it exactly. The bread was rising under a cloth. The little ones were not yet born. I said, Amos, some days when you are in the field and I am here alone in this house, I am so lonely I could sit down on the floor and cry. I did not say it to accuse him. I said it because it was true, and because I still believed that a true thing, spoken gently, was a safe thing to give a husband. He did not look up from his boot. He said, You have plenty to keep your hands busy. And then he said, A contented woman does not have time to be lonely. And he was not angry. That is the thing I need you to understand. He was not scolding me. He truly believed he had just handed me the answer. In his world, in the world we were both raised in, loneliness was not a feeling to be shared. It was a sign that a woman was not busy enough, or not faithful enough, or not grateful enough. My loneliness was, to him, a small failure of mine that a little more work would cure. There is so much more of this story than I can fit into one evening at this window. The nights that came after, the older women who finally told me the truth, and the one thing my grandmother said that changed how I understood my own marriage. I gathered all of it, everything I was never able to say aloud in our district, into a book. I called it A Quiet and Faithful Home. It is in the first pinned comment if you want to sit with the fuller telling after tonight. But please do not go yet, because I have not told you what I did next, and it is the part that every wife listening will recognize. What I did next was, I stopped. Not all at once. It is never all at once. But something in me had learned its lesson that night, the way you learn not to touch a hot stove. I had offered him the softest, most honest thing I had, and he had handed it back to me as a chore I had not finished. So the next time I was lonely, I did not say it. I kneaded it into the bread instead. The next time I had a worry, I did not lay it in his hands. I carried it up the stairs and let it lie down beside me in the dark, and I stared at the ceiling with it. By the end of that first winter, the evenings had gone quiet. Not an angry quiet, a settled one. We would sit, he with the almanac, me with the mending, and the only sound was the fire and the clock. And a stranger looking in the window would have said, There is a peaceful, faithful marriage. And they would not have been wrong, exactly. But they would not have known that the peace was made of everything I had decided to stop saying. I want to tell you about my neighbor, Rebecca, because she taught me I was not the only one. Rebecca was older than me, married 15 years, 6 children. One afternoon, we were putting up tomatoes together, our hands red to the wrist, and I was young enough and tired enough to be honest. I said, "Rebecca, does it ever feel like your husband cannot hear you? Like you could say the truest thing in the world, and it would land on him like rain on a roof and just run off?" Rebecca did not stop working. She did not even look surprised. She said, "Yeah." And then she said something I have never forgotten. She said, "The men are not taught to listen the way we need. They are taught to provide and to lead and to keep the Ordnung." Listening to a woman's heart was never on the list of things a good man is supposed to do, so we learned to carry our own hearts, and we learned to give them to each other instead. And she looked around the canning kitchen, at the 3 or 4 other women working there, and I understood what she meant. The thing I needed from Amos, the thing he could not give, I was standing in the middle of. The women gave it to each other. In the canning kitchen, at the quiltings, walking home from church in our little clusters, we said to each other all the things we had stopped saying to our husbands. I remember the first time I truly let myself be carried that way. It was a quilting, that next autumn, and I was tired down to my bones in a way I did not understand yet, though I would understand it soon enough, because I was carrying my first child and did not know it. And an older woman named Fanny, who must have been 60, watched me across the frame for a while, and then she came and sat beside me and put her hand over my hand, and she said, "You are working too hard at being fine." And I put my head down and I wept, right there over the quilt, and not one woman in that room acted like it was strange. 2 of them just moved closer. Nobody said a word about it afterward, but something in me that had been holding its breath since January finally let it out. That is when I began to understand that our marriages were only half of our lives. The other half was this: the women, the ones who knew without being told. For a long time I thought that was the whole answer, that a wife makes her peace by keeping her deep heart for the women and giving her husband a warm house and a still tongue, just as my mother said. And it is part of the answer, but it is not all of it, because there were still nights, lying beside a man I had married for love, when the loneliest place in the whole county was 6 inches away from him in our own bed. The women could carry a great deal. They could not carry that. The last thing, the thing that finally changed me, came from my grandmother in the last year of her life. I told her, near the end, that Amos and I lived side by side like 2 good horses in one harness, pulling the same load, never turning to look at each other. I said it a little bitterly. I expected her to tell me to pray, or to be more grateful, the way the older women often did. She did not. She took my hand, and she was quiet a long time, and then she said, "Sadie, do not measure him by the words he does not have. Measure him by the wood he splits before you wake, so the house is warm when your feet touch the floor. Measure him by the way he stands between you and every hard thing in this world. That is how his kind says the words you are waiting for. He has been telling you every single day. You have only been listening for it in the wrong language." And she was right. That was the winter I began to see it. The extra quilt laid over me in the night that I had thought was nothing. The way he always took the burnt heel of the bread for himself and gave me the soft middle. The chair no one else may sit in, that he had made with his own 2 hands the month before our wedding, sanding it down late by lamplight so it would be ready. The morning he walked 4 miles in the snow to bring back the one kind of thread I needed and had only mentioned once, in passing, and did not even remember saying. He had been speaking to me the whole time, in the only language he had ever been given, and I had been so busy grieving the words he could not say that I had gone deaf to the ones he could. I began to answer him in that same language. I stopped waiting for him to ask how my day had been, and I started leaving his coffee exactly the way he liked it without a word, and I watched him notice. I stopped testing him with feelings he did not know how to hold, and I started handing him the things he did know how to hold, and something between us, that had gone stiff and cold that first January slowly began to thaw. Not into what I had dreamed of as a girl, into something else, something real, that had grown up out of the actual soil of two ordinary people instead of the marriage I had imagined before I knew anything at all. I will tell you about the night our first child came, because it is the night the last of my bitterness broke. It was February, the worst of it. The roads drifted shut. The pains started in the evening, and by midnight I knew something was not right, that this was harder than it should be. There was no telephone in our district, no car, no quick ride to any hospital. Only the midwife, 2 farms over, and the snow between us and her. And I watched my husband, this quiet man who could not say that he loved me, put on his coat without a word and go out into that dark and that cold on foot, because the horse could not get through the drifts to bring her back. He was gone almost 2 hours. I did not know if he had lost his way. I lay there frightened in a way I had never been frightened in my life, and I understood in that fear exactly how much I needed him. This man I had spent a year quietly resenting for the words he could not find. He came back with the midwife, half frozen, ice in his beard, and he did not say a single tender thing. He built the fire up, he heated the water, he stood in the doorway of that room all through the long hours, not speaking, just there, the way a post is there, the way the roof is there over your head in a storm and you never once think to thank it. And near dawn our daughter came, and she was well, and I was well. And Amos looked at the two of us for a long moment, and his eyes were wet, and he still did not say anything at all. But he did not have to. I had finally learned to read. I understood then that I had married a man who would walk 2 hours through a blizzard for me and never once mention it again, and that I had spent a whole year grieving because he would not say me one soft sentence, and I felt ashamed of that grief. And then I forgave myself for it too, because how was a young girl to know? Nobody had taught me his language any more than they had taught him mine. After that, the small, silent gifts stopped looking like coldness to me. They started looking like what they had always been. When he salted the walk before I woke, so that I would not fall, that was I love you. When he mended the far fence on the coldest day of the year so the animals would not get out and grieve me, that was I love you. When he sat in his chair in the evening and did not talk, but angled himself, just slightly, toward where I sat with my mending, that was I love you, in the only tongue his father and his father's father had ever handed down to him. I want to be honest with you, because I promised at this window I always would be. It is not a perfect peace. There are still nights I ache for a husband I could simply talk to, the way I am talking to you now. That ache does not fully go away, and I have stopped pretending to the younger wives that it does. When a new bride comes to me with that same bewildered hurt in her eyes that I had at 21, I do not tell her it disappears. I tell her the truth. I tell her she will learn 2 languages, the one she speaks with the women and the one she speaks with her husband, and that a whole life can be built in the space between them. Because here is what I know now that I did not know that first winter. The silence in an Amish marriage is not always the silence of something dead. Sometimes it is. I will not lie to you and say it never is. But often it is the silence of 2 people who have run out of the easy words and are learning the hard ones, the ones made of actions instead of talk. I stopped starving at a table that was, in its own plain way, full. I learned to take my deep heart to the women and to receive my husband's love in the language he actually speaks, and to stop punishing him for the one language he was never taught. And something in our home softened. The silence is still there, but it is a fuller silence now. It is not the silence of a woman who has given up. It is the silence of a woman who finally learned to read. If you are a wife sitting in that quiet tonight, thinking you are the only one, thinking something must be wrong with you or with him, I want you to hear me. You are not the only one. There is nothing wrong with you. I wrote all of it down, for you. Everything I have learned about being a wife and keeping a home and holding on to your own soul while you do it. A quiet and faithful home. It is in the first pinned comment. And tell me in the comments so the other wives can see they are not alone. In the world where you grew up, who taught the men that listening was not their work? Sit at this window with me again, and I will keep telling you the things we are never supposed to say out loud.